I'm trying to think where I've heard that piece of music before. It's called Mr. Tambourine Man, and it was recorded by the Golden Gate Strings, originally released on Columbia Records DB7634. It says here on my shirt sleeves. It's jolly nice to be broadcasting live from Clacton at coming up to 8 minutes, pretty well, between 7 and 8 minutes past 3 o'clock. I think that the management ought to send a memo there to Bud Ballou. He used to be, when he was on Caroline, very good at timing. His programme would start at whatever time and it would end at whatever time. He was bagging an extra 5 or 6 minutes on the programme, but we won't mention that on the radio, but I think a little memo to him wouldn't go unmissed. It's a delight to be here in Clacton. Thank you very much to those who have come down in person. I'm aware that the programme is being broadcast literally all the way around the world. Greetings to you on the internet. But to those who've braved the weather, you probably heard today that we started off with wind and rain and all that sort of thing, and we're out stuck in the middle of the sea, almost like Big L days of years ago, but not quite. We're on Clacton Pier, more or less at the very end. Can't go much further or else you drop straight into the deep, not blue sea today, a bit brown sea. However, for those who've managed to come all the way, and I've noted people already from Norfolk, from Suffolk, a lot from Essex, a very warm welcome to you, and I'll be hanging around after the show. I've got to do the radio show because this is the whole purpose of coming down here. Nice to have met some of you earlier on and press the flesh. I'll be around certainly after 6 o'clock. I'm not racing off. I'll have a chat as long as it takes. So there we are. That's the promise for this afternoon. We hope you enjoy the music. It's a cross-section of music that we used to play on Big L in the 1960s. For my career, I'll talk you through a bit of it later on, began really on Caroline, and then I switched later on to Big L. So I've got a foot in that part and a foot in that part. But today we're Big L, so let's have one record now which is very, very much associated with Big L, the new Vaudeville Band. Peekaboo and everything tickety-boo at 11 minutes past 3 o'clock on Big L, Radio London, broadcasting live from Clacton Pier in the county of Essex. For my sins now, I present a nightly radio programme that covers quite a large patch. Rather strange to when I was on Caroline, when I was on London, we covered pretty well the whole of East Anglia with those radio signals. And here I am now back again, and have been for the last 5 years, broadcasting to what they call Eastern Counties, which is pretty well the same patch of the offshore days. So it's been terrific coming here today, as I did last year, and seeing some of the faces that used to tune in to the Watery Wireless days and still faithful, and tuning in now to my BBC programme. So it's great to see you, and thank you very, very much for coming. I mean, I won't single out names, but one gentleman who appears in my show quite often for the wrong reason is Terry Hammond, who has a daughter by the name of Caroline, and I can't think why he called her Caroline. But anyway, he's been in and out of hospital a lot in the last year, and I didn't expect to see him turn up here in Clacton today, but against all odds, he's braved the weather, and he's here sitting in the front row on the deck chairs. I don't know if you paid you £1.50 or however much it is to pay, but thank you very much indeed. He's putting thumbs up. That means he's obviously paid for the deck chair. And thank you very much indeed, Mary Nicholson, who's come all the way down from Clare in Suffolk. Delighted to meet you for the first time. She writes to me and sends me lots of goodies over the years. Lovely to meet you, Mary. And Tony and Jill Nugas I spot there from Romford in Essex. Good to meet you, and I'm sure there'll be lots more name checks between now and 6 o'clock. Okay, musically, we'll move on with the fortunes. Now, those who used to listen to Radio Caroline will very much associate the Fortunes with the tune Caroline. The strange thing is that when the Fortunes, and they're still performing today, go around the country, and I've done a few gigs with them in the past, they very, very rarely play Caroline. They say, well, it was not one of our hit records. And yet, that particular tune identifies a whole pirate era throughout the 1960s. We won't play that today, but I will play You've Got Your Troubles, because we as disc jockeys aboard either any of the offshore stations or the forts used to use that tune if there was something wrong, like we hadn't had any milk delivered or there were no cornflakes for the next week or two. We'd send a message to management in London, there were no phones those days. There were no mobile phones. You couldn't get off the boat, pop downtown and give them a ring. So we'd send messages out, and You've Got Your Troubles would normally alert somebody in London saying, problems. You've got your troubles there, Peter and Gordon. You're listening to Big L, Radio London, the sound of, whatever it's the sound of, at 18 minutes past 3 o'clock. A very windy sound. What I was going to do is sort of do a very, very quick flashback. We call in the military a SITREP, a situation report, just to go back to one's links with the offshore radio days. For my sins, I wasn't new to radio when I came across to this country. I'd been working with Forces Broadcasting and started off in 1958 when I was actually in the Royal Air Force doing national service, and was one of those lucky characters that was given a job with the British Forces Network in Cologne in Germany, starting at the bottom rung of the ladder, and I've been going down ever since. But no, just literally starting off with a job of emptying ashtrays and making sure that records were in the right covers and so on and so forth. And I'd worked overseas, and had been in Germany, and I was posted across to East Africa, working in Nairobi. And then I got mixed up with the troubles in Kuwait in 1961 when Iraq was going to invade Kuwait, which was basically, Iraq was not on our side, but Kuwait was. So I got involved in setting up a radio station out there in the desert, temperatures of 100 degrees plus. Then I came back to East Africa, and we got turfed out because independence came in December 1963, and then I was moved across to Aden. And thereby hangs another tale, which we may uncover later on when we hear from John Ross-Barnard, because he was also going at a similar time to join Forces Radio, and we almost met, or we could have had each other's jobs. But I didn't. After being in Aden for a while, is a four-letter word in the sand as far as I was concerned, I decided, no, to come back to Britain. And I met up with an old school chum who I hadn't seen for absolutely years and years, and we went for a pint or five at the Red Lion, the Lion Rouge, in Chesterfield Street, which is in London's West End, the Mayfair area, very much where Radio Caroline and Radio London set up their headquarters in due course. And I'd gone up and ordered a pint of bitter, or 2 pints or whatever it was, at the bar, and there was a music publisher in there who suggested, he heard me do the couple of pints of bitter, please, and said, have you ever thought of being a radio announcer? Well, of course, he didn't know who I was, and I didn't know who he was. But the long and short of it all is that I had to go and do an audition for Radio Atlanta. They were based in Soho. So I didn't delay in getting down to Soho, except I went down in daytime, did the audition, and ended up with a job on Radio Atlanta. But I paused a while because at that time, Radio Atlanta and Radio Caroline were merging. Alan Crawford was the music publisher. He was merging with a company run by Ronan O'Reilly, and it became Radio Caroline North and Radio Caroline South. And I ended up on Radio Caroline South in 1964, not long after it had been on air. And I'll just do a quick recap on who we were and how we got to where we got, and what was going on at the time. I put it all into a book called Pop Went the Pirates, but it was a long, long time ago. But we set off as disc jockeys from London. We set off from Liverpool Street, and we met up there, normally on the train which set off. I can't remember what platform it was, but it doesn't matter, but 8:30, it was the Norwich train, and we had to change at Manningtree in Essex and coming out to Parkston Quay in Harwich. And this was where we set off in those early days. It changed later, but certainly from 1964 to 66. Then we boarded a tender, which it was called the Offshore One, and that would take us the scenic route from Harwich, Parkston Quay, right the way around to opposite Walton on the Naze and Frinton on Sea, where the Mi Amigo, that was the ship that I was on board, was actually anchored. And the 31st of August 1964 was my very, very first visit out to Shipsville, as I used to refer to it then. Came out with a DJ called Doug Carr. Don't know if he's still around these days. Keith Martin, who became later a television announcer for Anglia. I think he's still lurking locally. And somebody called Tony Blackburn. And I thought with a name like that, he would go far. Well, maybe one day he will, but I think he's still working at it. He's got the same jokes, incidentally, today on radio when I hear him periodically, as he was using in 1964. So if he can get away with a script like that, so can I. So there we are, no progress there. So that was the very first trip I made out, the end of August 1964, and we arrived, it took about an hour and a half, I think, from London to come up to Parkston Quay, and then there was a huge amount of paperwork. Because we were illegal as such, we were pirates, as we were referred to. We weren't breaking the law at that stage of the game. That came in 1967. We were just bending the rules a tad. And we had to go through a whole series of security checks. They had to go through the Customs and Excise. There was the HM Water Guard, HM Immigration. There was a special branch. I mean, I just could not believe this. You had to have your passports because you were actually leaving the country as such. And so, in addition to that, we had British Rail, Trinity House, the Board of Trade, the Ministry of Transport, the Port of Health Authority, and the local harbour board, just for a group of half a dozen people to go and sit on a pirate radio ship for 2 weeks and broadcast. And it was equally as difficult coming back in when the customs, of course, used to go through all your bags to see what you were smuggling back into the UK. Of course, we were told you must not take anything back with you, either beer or cigarettes, which I think we were all pretty well behaved those days. The tender, the small boat that took us out from Parkston Quay to Radio Caroline those days, was a former Dutch fishing boat, weighed about 60 tons. It was called the Offshore One, registered in Barn in Holland. And there was a liaison officer by the name of Bill Scadden, who'd been a police officer in his day. He used to supervise the journey out to the ships, and we'd liaise with him and travel out. And it took about 2 hours from Parkston Quay to reach the ships, which are not a million miles from where we are now. Well, the Mi Amigo is down with Davy Jones' Locker at the moment. I mean, on a clear day, I'm sure you could almost see it here from Clacton. And accompanying us out to the ship would be quite a few seagulls flying and crying overhead. And it was interesting those days. My first visit then to Radio Caroline, I did a programme in the afternoon. My very, very first show was called Soundtrack, and I think I'd been on the boat less than an hour, so I hadn't even found my sea legs. And I presented this programme called Soundtrack and stayed with Radio Caroline for the best part of 18 months. Anyway, enough of the rabbiting. I just thought I'd give you a sort of background, because a lot of people ask, well, we used to listen to you, but where did you come from, and what was the story all behind the early days of Watery Wireless? Peter and Gordon there, Peter Asher and Gordon Waller. And great days those, remembering Peter and Gordon. They had a lot of hit records, but that was a record that we certainly associate with the Watery Wireless days. Wasn't played a great deal on BBC radio. Same as another record, Lady Godiva. I think the BBC didn't take too kindly to that particular sort of entertainment. We've got Leslie Gore to take us up to the Big L News at 3:30.
Sunshine, lollipops and...
Now, Radio London News tells you more, says it better.
This is London. Radio London, dateline 12th of August at 3:30 p.m. The Hamiltons. Neil and Christine left London for their Cheshire home this afternoon, stopping only to deny the charges of sexual assault to doorstepping press and camera crews. An Ilford woman whose identity has been protected under the law made the claims to publicist Max Clifford. Belfast. Sinn Féin chief negotiator Martin McGuinness has urged both sides and all opinions to reach an agreement in the 6 weeks left to resolve an outcome to the Good Friday Agreement. It had been feared that Sinn Féin would walk away from the table following the 24-hour suspension of the Northern Ireland Assembly. London. A statement is still awaited from Neil Hamilton and his wife. It is expected that we shall hear it within the next 10 minutes. Asylum seekers. David Blunkett is in the news twice today. He's ordered an immediate review of the way that asylum seekers are housed around the country, and he's facing a showdown with chief constables. They want the money to pay for 20,000 more police recruits this year alone. That is if they're to meet Blunkett's targets for crime reduction. Sex offenders. A top-secret list of sex offenders' addresses and phone numbers has been found among the rubbish outside a supermarket in Lincoln. The finder handed the list to the Sunday Times. Unlike the News of the World, its sister paper, the editor did not publish the information. Beach pollution horror. The EC are accusing the government of refusing to clean up our beaches. They're the dirtiest in the community, allegedly. New Labour say that £7 billion has already been spent, and anyway, it's not their fault. The Tories should have spent more of your taxpayers' money when they were in office 5 years ago. Mad cow disease. The parents of Rachel Forbes, a 24-year-old British woman, turned in desperation to US doctors in California as their daughter lay dying from CJD. Today, she's recovered her ability to talk, walk and feed herself. No thanks, apparently, to the National Health Service, according at least to one newspaper. Macedonia. A peace deal is due to be signed tomorrow, but still the fighting continues. British reporters come under fire themselves. Some locals feel that the international press have expressed pro-Albanian sympathies. Soccer Charity Shield. Liverpool dominated the first half. Just 45 seconds into the match, Michael Owen scored following a penalty, but just a minute later another foul failed to break the wall. Currently 2-1 to Liverpool. The referee has had to wave yellow cards at both teams. 70,000 Liverpool and Man U fans flooded into Cardiff's Millennium Stadium, bringing the city to a complete standstill. Endangered species. Chinese scientists have at last worked out a way of getting pandas pregnant. It's more difficult than you think. The male pandas aren't that interested, apparently, and the scientists have to do it for them. The mind boggles. But now 20 panda mums are pregnant and 14 of them are expecting twins. The cheapest shot. Boyfriends and husbands who are mean with it, and intentionally so, have been granted a wish that they could only have dreamed of. How do you buy flowers and chocolates for the price of a stamp? Post office boffins have obliged. Shortly, Im in the shed will be able to buy scratch and sniff stamps smelling of chocolates, flowers and other scents. Your ideas for other smells to the post office, please, not to us. And World Radio Network. There are over 9,000 radio stations in the USA, but only a handful of owners. Satellites have altered the face of US radio. Now there are plans to colonize the world's airwaves with US culture. But this is history repeating itself. In the 60s, the authorities accused offshore broadcasters of Americanizing our programs. But the audience proved that it was exactly what it wanted to listen to. In their millions, they ignored the light program and home service in favor of stations like Big L, Swingin' Radio England and Radio Caroline. Personally, I can't wait for KACL Seattle to start broadcasting here. And finally, the big mouths. Kiwi and Aussie disc jockeys, who are noted for their Wellington whinging tones, regularly come to the UK for treatment from ear, nose and throat specialists. But little-known research has just emerged that shows that American disc jockeys are born, not professionally created. Apparently they emerge from the womb with additional resonance generated by the prostate gland. British male and even some female wannabes are queuing up to visit Harley Street proctologists. They're pleading to be genetically modified. Stem cell research could develop voice clones of Bud Ballou and even Keith Skues. Keith, breathe deeply and cough. And the weather. Continuing signs of a dry afternoon, but the Met Pets are still hedging their bets about the remainder of the day. Might be more rain, but might not, they say. The next news comment to weather together on Big L at 4:30. John Ross-Barnard at CompuServe.com reporting.
Radio London News has told you more, said it better.
Was that live or recorded?
It was me, in the flesh.
I'm sorry, I left a few gaps there with the pauses, with the bleep things. I'd forgotten how to do them.
Yes, I heard from a young lady last night you were a bit quick on your diddly-dars.
Right, are you going to diddly-dar later on?
I shall, in an hour.
In an hour. We'll talk to you then. Are we allowed to do an expose on you at all?
The of course.
Unexpurgated version, the
Absolutely.
Exclusive story on how you worked at Radio Invicta?
Absolutely.
Oh, fine.
Just don't mention North East Coast Sunshine Resorts.
No, I certainly won't do that. And I haven't seen the script for the questions I'm going to ask you.
Aha.
So could you bring those in later, please?
Yes, I'll just draft them.
Thank you.
Very well.
That's Mr. Dave Berry with the four-letter word there, and that was, in fact, Mama. BBC Local Radio. It's Big L. That's habit, you see. Habit. Drilled into me. Do not mention Big L. Especially 2001. Okay, I won't do that. Indeed, it's Radio London live from Clacton Pier. I always do that when somebody dangles something in front of me, and there's some very rude things being dangled in front of me, which completely threw me, as it normally does if people do silly things in the studio, like dropping their trousers and setting fire to scripts, which have happened in the past. It tends to make you a little bit nervous and not concentrating properly. Can I just... so put your put your skirt back on, madam. Thank you. That's much better now. It's radio, you see. This is. I just want to thank very much Noel and Audrey from Clacton-on-Sea. They're regular listeners to my BBC programme, and very kind, brought some chocolates and things down here. So lovely to. I've not actually seen you today, but thank you very much. They've just been hand-delivered into the studio. It's 21 minutes now before 4 o'clock. Big L, broadcasting live from Clacton Pier, and it's a great pleasure to be able to introduce you now to a special guest. In fact, we've got two special guests for you this afternoon. One is a lady, you'll hear her in the next hour and a bit, who has been writing a book about Frank Ifield, and we aim to investigate just a little more. But first, right now, I'd like you to meet the Nashville Teens. I'd like to do it in the plural, but sadly we can't do that. We were hoping to hear from Ray Phillips. He was originally going to come along, founder member of the group, but sadly he's been taken ill. So very short notice, Colin Pattender has joined us, and he's been a bass guitarist with the group. Good afternoon, Colin. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Hello, Keith. How are you?
I'm tickety, thank you. Not too much boo around today, but tickety is okay. Now, you can't have been an original member unless you were sort of -5 when you started off with the Nashville Team. So talk us through those early days and how you got the initial break.
Well, I played with lots of different bands when I started at school, and various things happened, and my cousin and I had a band, and I eventually got involved with various people. Engelbert Humperdinck was one of them, and Solomon King and Lee P. Lee. And the bands just went on from that. It was a lot of fun, and the 60s went on, and all the the northern clubs, and good fun at the time.
But you were a session musician as such, were you?
I played in sessions and various studios, and
But how did that come about in the first place? How do you become a session musician? You just go up to a record company and you say, "Hello, I want to be a session musician. I play bass guitar."
No, I think what happens, you start to play and you get heard by one or two people, and various sessions sort of happen, and you get in there and you do a few, different recordings with different people.
So how did the Nashville Teens setup come about? Did you happen to see Ray Phillips or somebody else, or did they recommend you to approach them? Were they looking for a bass guitarist? How did that work?
Well, they were looking for a bass player, and my cousin, funnily enough, many, many years before, knew Ray. So we did know each other, and it's a funny small world how it goes round, and I went for an audition, as it happens, with the band, and I got in there, and as soon as I started playing, everybody was jumping up and down, and it really worked well, so everybody was happy, and it went on from there, really.
Okay, well, we associate the Nashville Teens really with one record. I know they had more, but you ask anybody who is from the 60s, and they'll probably say that record to do with cigarettes or something, or was it Pipe? Oh, Tobacco Road, that was the title, yes indeed. Tobacco Road, which was a big, big hit. It got, I think, to number 5 in the national charts in 1964. So should we have a listen to that record?
Absolutely, good idea.
Right, long time no hear this one. And we still tap our feet to it after all these years. From 1964, the Nashville Teens there on that Tobacco Road. You're listening to Big L, Radio London, broadcasting live from Clacton Pier in the county of Essex. It's been an interesting day. Weather-wise, it started off rainy, blowy and blustery. Now it's windy and no rain, fortunately, and a very good crowd who've come to see us this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who've braved the elements to come and see us at Clacton Pier. And to those of you who are listening on the internet around the world, very, very good afternoon to you. When I was broadcasting last week up in Norwich, where I'm based across the eastern counties, our programme comes from BBC studios there, and I got quite a number of emails from people around the countryside, and I think they also got one from Belgium asking, what time I was going to be on this Sunday, so they'll be listening in. So no individual name checks, because there are quite a lot of you, but thank you very much for emailing me, and we hope you're enjoying the sounds this afternoon. We have with us now a gentleman who started his life as a session musician. He's still making as much money today as he was way back in the 1970s. His name's Colin Pattender. I've changed his name slightly from Patterdale, which was a well-known typing error on my part, but this is what happens when you're listening to the Keith Skues Brief Snooze show from the BBC. So you've got your own back there now, Colin. That was the Nashville Teens. Let's move on just a while now, because in addition to that, you were a founder member of Manfred Mann's Earthband.
That's right, yes.
That was 1970s by then.
Well, 69 we actually formed the band, late 69. And Manfred knew of a good guitarist, Mick Rogers, and he at that time was in Australia, and he flew him over, and Chris Slade, the drummer, and I, funny enough, worked together in the early days. Chris was with Tom Jones and I was with Engelbert Humperdinck, and so we were with the same management. We knew each other, and it was a lot of good fun, and we got together with the band, and it was really exciting. I mean, the first rehearsals and things were absolutely brilliant. I mean, it just went on from that. I mean, we rehearsed for about a year before we actually went out and did any gigs. It was exciting.
And where were those gigs? Was that in the United Kingdom initially?
No, the first one was actually in Italy. We went over to Italy, a very quiet first gig to try and hide it all, and so nobody would see us. And the funny thing was, I walked in the door and my friend from around the corner was in there and working in the club.
Never.
Absolutely.
Really?
So it was really funny to see him.
Okay, you enjoyed at least two hit records with Manfred Mann, Blinded by the Light, which we'll hear in a moment's time, and also Joybringer. You were on both those recordings. The band, once they were established with those hits, were taken all around the world, weren't you? You were touring
everywhere.
Literally.
Yes.
Is there anywhere where you didn't go, like Swaziland?
France we didn't do so well in, funnily enough, but everywhere else seemed to be absolutely brilliant. I mean, the gigs in Australia was about the biggest gig we did, was 35,000 people. Randwick Racecourse it was, and just a brilliant gig. Absolutely amazing.
When you started off on the tours, did the punters who came along to see you, did they expect you to come up with records like Do Wah Diddy and My Name is Jack because of the name Manfred Mann? All right, it was the Earthband, but of course everybody remembers Manfred Mann just as Manfred Mann. Were you expected to do those numbers? Did you do them?
Oh, no, we didn't do them, funny enough, but I think in Germany they were expecting something different. I mean, everywhere else it was they were expecting the pop music, but in Germany I think we were more of an underground band, and I think we pleased the audience at that time. I think they were really looking forward to the band every time we turned up and did the gigs. You know, it was really good.
Okay, we'll listen to a track from those days, around about 1976, I think, for Blinded by the Light, which was more successful in the United States of America than here in Britain. I mean, I'm not going on chart numbers, I don't have any in front of me, but I would say number 6 in the UK, and top of the charts, number 1 in America.
Yes, number 1.
Let's listen to that right now. Manfred Mann's Earthband there, Blinded by the Light. Big hit record in the United States of America, number 1 in 1976, and it didn't do too badly in this country either. Number 6, certainly a record not to be sniffed at. BBC local radio in the eastern counties has got nothing at all to do with the broadcast this afternoon, which is coming to you courtesy of Big L, Radio London on 266 metres in old money. It's really great to be back on that frequency again. I almost feel at home for a moment there, but except they've changed it now. It's all these kilobytes and decicentimeters or something. I don't know, some numbers that don't ring a bell with me, but 266 in old money is good enough for me. You're listening to us, broadcasting live from Clacton Pier, 7 minutes before 4 o'clock. News with John Ross-Barnard coming up on the half hour. It was interesting to spot in the audience here today somebody who doesn't want his name mentioned, called Dave Gregory, who I had the pleasure of working with on Radio 1. I was a founder member of Radio 1 years and years ago, and there he was, just propping up one of the rails, not a million miles from where I am at the moment. So greetings to him, and to Chris Dannett, who's come down from Yorkshire, especially for the broadcast this particular weekend. Jolly nice to see you both and press the flesh. Chatting at the moment, though, with Colin Pattender, who was a member of the Nashville Teens. He was a founder member of Manfred Mann's Earthband. He's been around a tad. He has mentioned this afternoon Engelbert Humperdinck, Leapy Lee and others. So just to go back on those names again, what were you doing? A sort of session musician to Engelbert?
Well, it was more of a backing band, you know, the whole thing. It wasn't just a session thing. It was touring and doing all the northern clubs around England, really, with him. A lot of good fun. I mean, I still remember, in fact, my wife just reminded me that he owed my dad still £5 actually for some petrol money, but there we go.
Oh, that'd be, how long ago was that?
It was a long time ago.
Well, it's probably worth about £7.47 now, is it?
Exactly.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, and just tell us on the Nashville Teens, because we'll hear another track, or we'll have time for 2 tracks, I guess. So we'll play one right now, which is The Biggest Night of Her Life. Tell us who the current lineup are and where you're gigging these days.
Right, well, the drummer's been with the band for a long, long time. His name's Spud. His real name's Adrian Metcalf, if everybody wants to know. But the younger member of the band, but still a very, very sturdy drummer, very solid drummer. And the keyboard player is, I've just forgotten, but I'll remember it in a minute. And Ray, obviously, he's been singing well with the band, and very, very strong voice, and still has a very, very strong voice. And the guitarist is I've forgotten again as well. That's good news, isn't it? Both from Bracknell, they are, and Ken Osborne is the guitarist. He's a younger guy again, and plays a very loud, very powerful rock guitar. Very good.
During the 1980s, you changed your style, I guess, not you personally, but the band, from what we'd associated in the 1960s. And by the 1980s, would it be fair to say that you were appealing to an audience that were ostensibly bikers and heavy rock fans?
Yes, we certainly did a lot of the bikers gigs, and very muddy they've been in the past as well. But a lot of good fun, and yes, we're really a heavy rock and roll band now, loud rock and roll. Mm-hmm. I think that a lot of the gigs that we do nowadays, which are the 60s events, are more really with the more of the softer sort of 60s bands, and then when we come along, it's really a very powerful band, and I think they find it sometimes rather difficult. It's a bit loud for everybody, but good fun, a lot of good fun.
Well, on radio we've got volume control, so if it's a bit deafening for somebody who's listening at 4 minutes to 4, a double time check. 4 minutes before 4 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon from Big L. And we'll listen to a record that was played towards the latter end of the days of broadcasting on Radio London. We closed down on the 14th of August 1967, but it was doing very well in the Fab 40, and the record did even better in Australia, where it got to number 1, called The Biggest Night of Her Life. Good stuff there, The Biggest Night of Her Life, and that particular record, which shot to the top of the charts in Australia. More about Australia in the second hour of the programme. We'll be meeting a young lady who's going to tell us about a book she's currently working on, the life story of Frank Ifield, which will be very interesting indeed. So we'll meet Pauline Halford. She's coming on, I can see her from where I'm broadcasting now, and she'll be here within the next half hour or so. Anyway, going back to that particular record, it was played towards the end of Big L. That's what I said. In fact, I think, to be truthful, trying to cast my mind back, and also being handed a reminder by a gentleman called Roger saying, well, actually, it wasn't actually released until November, but the Radio London management heard it as an acetate and said that record will do very well probably in Australia. So I think that's the way that particular record went, and did just as it said. Big, big hit. Well, we've had Colin Pattender in the studio. Tell me the name again.
Colin Pattender.
Well, why can't you change your name to something much, much easier? I mean, it's very difficult to say after, well, we haven't had any beer today, have we? No, it's been water so far and a cup of tea.
It was last night, wasn't it?
Oh, it was last night. Yeah, that was what it was, anyway. Anyway, Mr. P, thank you very much indeed for coming along. Most grateful to you. And are we going to see you live on stage anywhere around the countryside the next week, month, year?
Certainly over the next year, yes, of course. Yes, there's certainly 60s events going on, and the teams are on a few of them, so we'll be around and still gigging.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, keep rocking, as they say, and it's good to hear those sounds again. Thank you very much indeed for taking time out this afternoon. Colin Pattender from originally the Nashville Teens, Manfred, Mann's Earthband, and others as well. You're gigging with other names?
Yes, with Jackie Linton Band at the moment as well.
No, there's another name from way back when.
Absolutely, yes.
Colin, thank you very much indeed. We'll end up musically something like this. And fading into the middle distance there, the Nashville teams, or to be more precise, Ray Phillips. And we made history with that. You probably didn't realise, but Big L used to make history way back in the 1960s, being the first radio station to play records long before the BBC ever had that opportunity. And this afternoon you heard Little Bird, This Little Bird, which you've heard before as a song, Marianne Faithfull and others, but that's the first time that that particular recording was broadcast featuring Ray Phillips of the Nashville Teens, first broadcast ever. So there we are, Big L, Radio London, broadcasting live from Clacton Pier. My thanks indeed to Colin, who took the trouble to come and join us this afternoon. We've got another special guest for you lined up in about 6 or 7 minutes' time, but I'm told I must read the weather forecast. Well, I think this one was compiled probably about a fortnight ago, but we'll just check it between the group of us, should we? It says, Clacton will once again become part of our 1966 recreation of swinging England. This sounds like this was written by, I can't even hazard a guess, but I don't think that's of really interest to us because it's talking about weather was happening this morning. The afternoon temperatures are still reasonable, it says here, in the upper 60s. I suppose inland it's going to be a lot warmer, and it's going to be less humid than last night. Overnight, it will feel seasonably warm. The temperatures will be in the 50s in old money. That's 12 degrees centigrade. And the week turning warmer and humid in the south. We could have done with bright sunshine this afternoon, but you can't have everything, I'm told. So there we are. We'll move on musically right now. And Georgie Fame.
Every evening